Hi, you're watching a brand new series of News 9 Live. This is Boardroom Brunch and I'm Kartik Malhotra. On every edition of Boardroom Brunch, we'll brainstorm on how India Inc. is getting up really towards the future. Will India be a leader or a laggard in its quest to become future ready? And what will drive this change? And who will be in the driver's seat when it comes to transformation? Will it be technology? Will it be possible? Or will it be you, the consumer? Will supply follow demand or will demand define the future? Today, let's dive straight into a sector that we all love. Yes, I'm talking about automobiles. The Indian auto sector is at a crossroads. Never seen before demand for vehicles, rapid changes in engineering and technology, policy measures to promote cleaner fuel, and now a safety standard that competes with the best globally. Where is India's auto sector headed, and is India Inc. ready for the future? Joining me to discuss this, I have Shashank Srivastav, Senior Executive Officer at Maruti Suzuki, Hardeep Singh Brar, National Head of Sales and Marketing Kia India, and Nishant Arya, Vice Chairman JBM. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining us on Boardroom Brunch. I wish you were here with us in person and we could have done a real brunch, but I think for now, let's just chew on the brunch of ideas and brainstorm on where the Indian auto sector is really headed. Shashank, let me start straight by asking you, and let's look at some numbers in context. And I really want to throw some data to put the auto numbers in context here. We've seen an 18% year-on-year growth when it comes to what we call as PVs, or passenger vehicles, cars that you and our friend Hardeep really makes and sells in the country. Compare this to India's GDP not growing at the same clip. In fact, estimates suggest that Q2 GDP numbers will come in at about 6.3%. Auto sales growing 3 times the size of the GDP. How do you read these numbers?
I think it's been a very good year for the auto industry. And if you look at the calendar year, we have seen the best ever January, the best ever February, the best ever March, the best ever April, the best ever May, June, July.
Every month you see the graph only going up and up.
Yes, and September was, of course, the best ever month in any year or any month. So, as you said rightly, H1 of this financial year saw for the first time PV industry crossing the 2 million mark. First time that in the calendar year, 9 months, we've crossed the 3 million mark.
Absolutely.
And it's headed to about 4.1 million mark this year. So it's been a great run. However, I must bring a perspective to it when you compare it with the GDP. Of course, the auto sales are very closely correlated with GDP. The correlation factor, the R square factor, is actually 0.987, which is really high.
Yeah.
However, when you look at from 2018 to 19, so we did see a dip after that during the COVID years. And after 2018-19, when the sale was about 33.6 or 33.7 lakhs, you actually have a CAGR expectedly of about 4.1%. So it's not that 18%, which is probably a wrong impression because of the last 2 years of great growth. But when you compare it with 2018-19, which was the previous peak, then it's actually a 4.1% CAGR. But nevertheless, I think judging by the GDP growth and also by the inquiry levels, the demand parameters of bookings, I think we are looking at a good year, about 4.1 million this year.
Okay, Hardeep Singh Brar, let me take this to you. How do you concur with pre-pandemic levels? Even pre-pandemic, the previous peak, we are growing at about 4%. My simple question is this party too good to be true, and is this momentum really going to sustain?
If we look at the current year and last couple of years, I think the growth rates have been tremendous, growing at 25% rate. But as Mr. Srivastav said, we have to look at a little longer horizon. In the last decade, the growth rates were about 3 to 3.5%. And if we look at last 5 years as well, pre-pandemic to now, again, the CAGR is about 4%. So I think this is the range of what we are looking at. Of course, there will be aberrations. A particular year, you will see a strong double-digit growth, and there is then a decline in every 3 to 4 years, which averages it out. But fundamentally, I think India is in a very good state. I think you're looking at, whether you look at the PMI, the Purchase Managers Index, the way stock market is going, I think things are looking quite positive overall. I think that's the long-term growth story of India will sustain. Of course, there will be ups and downs year-on-year basis, but I think long-term story is pretty solid for India.
Okay, Nishant, everybody talks about, when you say automobiles, unfortunately, everybody just very, very obviously thinks about cars and thinks about the cars that they want to eventually own. Does it make you a little insecure? But anyway, don't answer that. I think numbers are growing even when it comes to, public transportation. But what I want to understand from you is that do you see this concept of shared mobility at some level being cannibalized by people wanting to own more cars? And hence, while for the economy it's great news because, more number of cars being sold is great. But at some point, do you think there is some sort of a threat to shared mobility at this moment?
No, I think both would coexist because the market is growing exponentially. And in our country, we are less than the global average of 1.5 to 2 buses per thousand people. We are less than one bus per thousand people if you'd include all modes of public transport and buses across the country. So, therefore, when we are today between 1.5 to 1.7 million buses, actual requirement would be close to 2.3 to 2.5 million buses. So there's a huge shortage, and that's only about augmentation. And on the other hand, there's a large replacement requirement coming in. So the market has exponential growth opportunities, and clearly shared mobility is more concentrated. If I look at pooling other things with respect to people traveling from point to point, whereas in public transportation it is not purely point to point, it's from one area to another, and then the last mile is covered separately. So therefore both mediums coexist and complement each other rather than competing today. And clearly, as multiple cities are drawing out their urban transport planning, so there they are considering buses as a very key mode of transportation, whereas the passenger vehicle penetration is also increasing parallelly. So I think there's no threat of any kind, and both will go hand in hand.
Okay, no threat of any kind at this moment. Now, let's just try and divide the journey of the auto sector as I see it, and correct me if I'm wrong, into three potential eras. There was an era of hatchbacks. We are living in an era of SUVs, and those numbers are absolutely astounding. And I'm sure both Hardeep and Shashank would want to concur with that. And then there is a future, and that future seems to be right now in a bit of a flux. Now, there are multiple innovations happening when it comes to technology and engineering, and we are talking about a varied variety of energy solutions. While we continue to have the ICE engines and diesel takes a back seat, we also have these multiple new technologies and multiple new engines, hydrogen fuel, hybrids, and the eventual goal of EVs. So, Shashank, what is the future really? What fuel type or what energy kind is actually going to be the future?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question because the whole industry is debating. There seems to be, regarding India, there seems to be, on the volume front, obviously a consensus. Hardeep was just mentioning. We are looking at a 6% CAGR, 6 million cars by 2030, the annual sales, out of which it's expected about 17 to 20% will be electric vehicles. And of course, as the emission standards have gone up and is expected to go up even further with the CAFE 3 norms coming into force in 2027-28, I would, there is a consensus that long-term electric vehicles seems to be the future. Okay. However, till the time they become really mainstream, and that could be a very long time for India, it is expected that there will be a mix of technologies which will help us achieve sustainability as far as emission is concerned. In fact, we are looking at not just electric vehicles. The industry, we believe, has to be agnostic to the technology to achieve the emission. You would see maybe a hydrogen, you could see biogas, ethanol-based blended fuels, hybrids, and hybrids can be a very good stepping stones to ultimate better acceptance of EVs in the future. Of course, remember, electric vehicles, although the consensus is there, for different countries, the emission gets affected differently. So while we are talking about tailpipe emissions, and that is the pump to wheel, but we also have to look at the well to wheel and also what they call cradle to grave, which is about recycling also. So in different countries, the adoption rate will be different for electric. And in India, where we have a large part of electricity generated to thermal means, we would see a mix of technology for a long time to come.
Okay, so Hardeep, I want to ask you then, from a policy making perspective, doesn't the job of the government become a little more complex? That where should you park your investments and how should you incentivize this pivot or this sort of migration to newer energy types? Where should the government invest? Should it invest in hydrogen stations? Should it invest in EV battery charging infrastructure? What should the government really do to arrive at some sort of a consensus on where we feel we want to go as a country?
What I feel is, as Mr. Srivastav said, that electric is the future, and while my estimates are a little more optimistic, I think by 2030,
what is the number you're putting? What is the growth you're putting at? Okay.
In terms of electric vehicles penetration. But whatever we choose, whether it's hydrogen or flex fuel or electric, I think the long-term policy is very, very critical. We can't keep on shifting the goalpost. I think we need to have a very clear-cut, maybe 5 to 10 years plan that by this time we need to focus on electric, and this is when the hydrogen will come in. I think the long-term clarity is very critical. And of course, I agree that the flex fuels are going to be the future. Electric is the immediate thing. And of course, long term, we are looking at the hydrogen as well. But I think from our current viewpoint, I think diesel is still going pretty strong. If you look at especially the 10 lakh plus category, the diesel demand is almost like 40 to 50%. And as you keep going higher, when you go from 15 to 20 lakhs, the demand is as high as 70 to 80%. So diesel, which we are kind of trying to rule out. The consumers are still, they are still going towards the diesel in the 10 lakh plus category.
Okay.
But to put a long story short, I think the long-term perspective is very critical from deciding the transmissions and the fuel, etc.
Right. So I started the show by actually saying that what is going to drive this change? Is it going to be demand or is it going to be supply? So Shashank, in that context, do you agree with what Hardeep is saying? Is there still enough demand for diesel? And in that context, do you think at some point in the near future, Maruti may want to relook at its decision to let the diesel engines go?
My short answer is no. We are not getting into diesel. Most of the manufacturers worldwide are getting out of diesel, and there is a reason for that. The requirement for diesel vehicles to be converted to meet the new emission norms, and they are going to get stricter by the day, is going to be very, very costly. And on the cost of acquisition alone itself, the diesel demand should fall. In fact, it has already fallen. Remember, in 2012-13, the diesel demand was 60% of the industry. It has come down to around 17% now. In hatches, in sedans, in passenger cars, it is zero. In SUVs, SUVs, it is around 15-16%.
Right.
So in vans, it is close to zero. So I think what Hardeep is saying is really related to the larger SUVs, where for
the real SUVs,
yes,
which are over 4,000 meters mm in length, which are greater than 170 mm in ground clearance and 1500 cc engines. But unfortunately, we classify a lot of cars as SUVs.
Allow me to complete. That's right, actually. And eventually, everybody will get out of diesel. And that there is even more consensus than whether when the electric vehicles will become mainstream.
Right.
There is more consensus that diesel will be out. And remember, one last point I wanted to make from what Hardeep said. Of course, I generally agree with him. Not just because I want to look sort of in agreement with Hardeep, but also because, but in reality, actually, the long-term thing which he mentioned about the government policy actually need not be for any particular powertrain.
Okay.
It can be for emission.
Okay.
So you can have emission, and targets can be met by different. If it is met by electric alone, fine. If it is met by hydrogen, fine. If it is met by water as a fuel, then fine. I mean, it can be anything.
Right.
I think the long-term thing is about fixing the emission levels rather than on supporting any particular technology.
All right, fair enough. Nishant, Arya, let's bring this back to EVs squarely. And, I think the adoption of electric mobility is much ahead when it comes to commercial vehicles than it is, with respect to passenger vehicles. Now, I think everybody who talks about EV definitely has this one concern about charging infrastructure. And commercial vehicles, unlike passenger vehicles, have longer distances to cover. So when you talk about interstate mobility, when you talk about, within the state, city to city connectivity, you're looking at long haul journeys. So from JBM's perspective, how do you see this charging infrastructure and these talks that we've had so many times, of battery swapping infrastructure, which again, I believe might be easier to do when it comes to buses than to passenger vehicles, because the make and the size of the battery is likely to be, more similar when it comes to buses of all kinds. So talk to me specifically about charging infrastructure. Talk to me specifically about the time required to charge a bus, and what do you do with passengers who are sitting in a bus at a time when the bus is being put on charge?
So actually, buses are most well suited when it comes to electric vehicles, in my opinion, because they have a definitive route. When it comes to a city operation, they're running about 200 to 300 kilometers a day.
Yeah.
They have bus depots where charging infrastructure can be well installed. And on the other hand, there are bus terminals where buses can be clearly charged. So I think those are clear opportunities available where the battery size can be optimized. So I wouldn't agree that all buses have the same technology on battery. It's totally different today, and that's how it should be, because the architecture and the configuration is totally independent. And that's where we see that clearly ultra fast charging is our focus area, where we charge the buses in half an hour to 1 hour, depending on the size of the battery pack. We can go from 1C to 3C charging and equip our vehicles to really have a very fast turnaround time. Even in intercity buses or interstate buses, there has been a great success, because the buses are having a very good range, which can go up from 250 to 500 kilometers in a single charge. And after every 250 kilometers, any which way, the buses have to stop 20 to 30 minutes for giving a break to passengers, which can be used for top-up charging. So there are many avenues available for charging infrastructure and the bus architecture to be in place. The only requirement is that how bus manufacturers are not positioning them only as bus OEMs. So at JBM, we are very focused as an EV ecosystem provider, where we provide the charging infrastructure, battery technology, vehicle technology, and the whole operating model to the customers. And the customers are able to get a TCO benefit, and they are able to realize that benefit from the day one, because the operating cost drops by about 75%.
Sure.
And they're able to eliminate the pilferage completely. And even the driver fatigue gets reduced, the number of accidents go down substantially, and the vehicle complexity in the spare part cost gets eliminated. And on the other hand, the fuel cost is negligible, about a fraction of what they actually end up paying. So on a TCO basis, it makes a lot of sense, and there is a parity which has been hit today itself. That's why you see in any BP or other government programs, subscription level is much more than what the government is ready to offer today, since multiple cities are able to deploy them very well, and it is a real-time benefit with the parity available on day one on a per kilometer basis, which they call gross cost contracts.
Sure. But very specifically, battery swapping, a good idea, a bad idea, an idea worth pursuing, or put in the bin and look at just setting up charging infrastructure?
So in buses, battery swapping in my case is not the best idea, because you have to install big robos and other things. In a bus, the battery packs range from a ton to 3 tons. Swapping that size of battery doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, it becomes a big safety hazard. Infrastructure requirement goes up multifold.
Right.
And today, with the ultra fast charging opportunities available and the high energy density batteries which you can bring in play, are the most feasible, and that's what's being deployed at 95% plus locations worldwide.
All right. So, Hardeep Singh Brar, let me just come to you. And since we are talking about electric mobility and electric vehicles, for the end consumer, the cost is still fairly high. Do you think it'll make sense? And since this show is about brainstorming, about ideas, which are going to define the future, I mean, crystal ball gazing, a little bit of research that some people have put together, does it make sense for auto companies like yours and Shashank's to actually come up with a model where you purchase the car and you rent the battery? and the battery life runs out, you replace it, exchange it, and get a better value. So the upfront cost, which accrues to the consumer while buying an EV, can go down by perhaps as much as 50% or so.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that has been the reason for the success story in China as well.
Absolutely.
Because they never sold the product, together with the battery. They sold the car, and then they gave the battery on leasing or loan or whatever you may say, so that the initial burden comes down on the consumer. So I think that's a fantastic idea, but I think again, if you are taking a loan on the car and then taking loan on the battery, there are two simultaneous loans running actually, and the cost of the battery being almost 50%. And if we try to say that you pay as you use, or you pay equivalent to the fuel that you were using earlier, I think that that amount is too less to really take care of the monthly cost. I think the real game changer would be, to me, there are two big factors which will play by about 2025. Now, today, if you look at the IC engine versus the electric vehicle, the cost difference is about 60 to 70%.
Right.
And when you look at the luxury cars, the cost difference is much lesser.
True.
Which is why the consumers are going towards the EVs. I feel when the cost difference is about 25 to 30% between the IC engine and the EV, I think that's where the inflection point would come. And I feel as the more investment will come in, for example, the PLI scheme has been launched in India. Once we start manufacturing batteries locally, I think that's where the cost will come down. And I think the second biggest reason in India is the choice today. You frankly practically have only a couple of cars in the mass market, maybe 3 or 4. And by 2025, it is expected that the total number of EVs would be close to 40 to 50, out of which majority of them would be in the mass market. Right. I think the choice and the price gap, once these 2 points are taken care of, and of course, there are other points like charging infrastructure and the range of the car. I'm keeping those aside, and I'm purely looking at it. What will really fuel them? I think these two would be definitive. Things that would, if they happen, then that would really make a lot of difference, and that will fuel up the demand, and
Sure.
That's going to be an inflection point as for me.
Sure. So I don't want to spend too much time on EVs, but one question to you, Shashank, before we move on to something else which is equally important and relevant. Is lithium mining in India going to be a game changer when it comes to India being self-reliant in making its own batteries rather than dependence on importing, paying the import duties, passing on that entire burden plus your margin to the consumer?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, Hardeep also mentioned how one of the big constraints for the high adoption rate for EVs is the cost of acquisition itself.
Right.
And 50% of it comes from the battery price. The battery today is about 50% of the overall cost of the vehicle, of the EV. And battery cost was expected to come down last 3-4 years. From about $150 a kilowatt hour to less than 100. It hasn't happened. It has remained more or less similar. In fact, it's gone up slightly because of the lithium prices going up. Mm-hmm. And that is one big reason, one big way by which you can increase the adoption of EVs in India is definitely to bring down the cost of acquisition through cost of batteries, which can happen through localization. And by localization, I mean not just assembly of battery cells, but also producing those battery cells. And right. And therefore, anything which helps in that, including the material cost, which is the lithium cost, is going to help in the localization, and hence the lower cost of acquisition, hence the faster point of inflection for EV adoption. And right. Remember, I was listening to the trajectory which the buses will take. Actually speaking, when you look at electric vehicles for the personal space, you would also have to develop the charging infrastructure to prevent that range anxiety.
Absolutely.
Yes, and research has shown in India only 47% of the people have parking spaces that they park at the same spot every night. So you will need to have, but of course it can come. It has been seen that whenever a new technology comes, the accessories which support it will also develop. So surely charging infrastructure will develop, probably with a with a faster chargers, or the cell chemistry will obviously develop in a higher energy density, which will enable you to have smaller batteries. And therefore, it's going to be very interesting going forward. And we are betting at Suzuki. We have invested more than 10,000 crore in trying to localize battery and the battery components in Gujarat. We have already invested that amount, and that we believe is the right way to go so that the EV adoption becomes faster.
So are we going to be on target to see 2025 your slew of electric vehicles launching with the Made in India batteries? Or am I jumping the gun?
Yeah, so we will be launching in our first EV, which will be the mid SUV space, which will be in the year 24-25 financial year.
Okay.
And we will obviously try to keep the cost of acquisition to our consumers very, very competitive. Definitely.
All right. So yeah, enough talk about EV. Let's move to something which I think is far more important. We are talking about environment, and we're talking about the air we breathe and bringing those pollution levels down to keep the population safe. But what about safety of passengers who are in the car itself? And Bharat NCAP in that manner, I think, has emerged as at least one step where India is saying that it wants to take safety a little more seriously. Hardeep Singh Brar, let's come to you. Let's talk about passenger vehicles first and then move to commercial vehicles. So in passenger vehicles, my only grouse with how Bharat NCAP has been rolled as a pure consumer, as a journalist, is that it's still voluntary. Do you think the industry will lose out at the cost of consumers gaining if safety ratings were to become mandatory?
So first of all, I think, as per the auto consumer study, safety, sustainability, and features, these are the three big factors which have come out. And, looking purely from a safety viewpoint, firstly, I think the B NCAP has really increased the awareness of the consumers. But before that, this is about the passive safety. But what we believe in is that, the active safety is far more important, which does not let you even meet with an accident. And so this is where we have brought in ADAS in our flagship model, Seltos, this year. And this is a level 2 ADAS, which has about 17 safety features, starting from the collision detection from all across. So yes, as you invest into safety, the costs definitely go up. We have made 6 airbags mandatory. In fact, we've started with a standard 6 airbags with our Karens. And this time we have made 6 airbags standard in Seltos, and we have started with 4 airbags. So we have taken care of both passive safety as well as active safety. And yes, the cost definitely, the input cost is higher, and you have to manage that. But also from a consumer viewpoint, the consumers are looking at safety as one of the key parameters when they are taking these decisions. So I think we are moving in line with what consumers want. And yes, they are willing to pay the price for that, and that makes our task easier by, passing on the cost which goes into making the cars safer.
Okay, Shashank, voluntary versus mandatory. Don't you think safety ratings for all cars which are sold to Indian consumers, which drive on Indian roads, need to have a star rating, Bharat NCAP certified star rating, whether automobile makers choose to send it or not? Just speaking as a consumer, don't you think it's about time that we made safety ratings absolutely mandatory?
Yeah, so I think we are in a transitional phase at the moment regarding safety. Earlier, safety was not such a big criteria in the minds of the consumers, but now it is becoming very, very important. As Hardeep just mentioned about sustainability, safety, both are becoming very important buying criteria. And therefore, at Maruti Suzuki, we have always believed that the government regulations, when they come out, it's actually we should try to exceed those regulations in terms of safety, and that's what Maruti Suzuki has been doing.
Right.
And yes, B NCAP is a great initiative, because certainly it's more relevant to India compared with the G NCAP, which may have features which are not relevant to the Indian conditions.
Absolutely.
So B NCAP definitely is a great step, and it will help consumers make the very informed choices regarding the product that they will buy. But one thing I must point out here, though, and very clearly, that safety is not just about engineering of vehicles. we really focus on engineering of vehicles. It actually is about 4 E's, which is about education, enforcement, engineering of vehicles and roads as well,
Right.
and emergency care. But if you look at, for example, the cheapest way, maybe the best way for safety, which is just put on your seat belt. In fact, if you have airbags and you don't put on the seat belt, it's more dangerous than having no
Agreed.
airbags.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
you have to, in fact, of the 1.6 lakh deaths that we saw in the road
Yeah.
accident last year, of course, 87% were two-wheeler and
Two-wheelers.
pedestrians. But of the cars, 85% of those deaths happened because people were not wearing seat belts.
So
So
let's
while
take this
we
to Nishant Arya. I agree with you. I think, it's absolutely mandatory that seatbelts need to be mandatory, not just for the passengers sitting in front, but even those sitting behind. But Nishant Arya, no such rules, no such mandates for passengers who are opting to travel in buses or opting to travel in other forms of commercial vehicles, not their own cars. I mean, buses don't come with seat belts. We see buses still overcrowded. And even if buses do come with seat belts, nobody really out there to enforce passengers wearing seat belts. So do you think we need a similar sort of, enforcement of law, A, creation of law, B, enforcement of law, and C, some sort of a rating system which, on the basis of which, buses can qualify or be disqualified from running on Indian roads?
Yeah, so currently buses use a system which is called a bus code. So bus code incorporates multiple such safety norms.
Okay.
So the buses do come with seat belts now. And in certain cases, definitely when you look at intercity travel, then passengers do use seat belts. But for local travel, which is intracity travel, the average travel time of a passenger is 10 minutes.
Okay.
And two-thirds of the passengers are standing in a bus, one-third are only sitting. So
So is it
therefore, we
time,
try and building such kind of.
should the future of mobility really be that you don't have passengers standing in buses, which A, compromises their stability, impedes the comfort of other passengers, C, a higher load on the engine itself, higher emission levels. Overall, when you talk about public shared mobility, should there now be some very, very clear, focused approach towards making public transportation comfortable, convenient, safe without cost really going up?
No, definitely. I think a lot of focus has happened on performance and comfort. Now, safety is paramount, and that is which is something which is hygiene and needs to be pushed very hard. And definitely, I think it's important because 90% of the Indian country's public is using public transport in different forms. So we have to see that how such kind of solutions can be deployed and can be really taken to the grassroots level where the awareness campaigns and other things are also done so that
Right.
people understand the purpose of such kind of solutions being deployed for them.
Okay, sure. So I think we've discussed quite a bit, but one thing that I really wanted to touch upon, and we're running a little short of time, so, let's just dive into it quickly. And it's a subject, that we've been reading about and videos that we've been seeing and test cases, and actually even in Western US, we've seen taxi services being, being driven by driverless cars. So I don't know, I think Tesla came up with mammoth plans, Google came up with mammoth plans, and we haven't really seen, barring one or two startups, really get into this commercialization of driverless vehicles. Shashank, too early for India, not a priority for India, and is it an idea worth exploring at all?
Certainly it's an idea which is worth being explored. Driverless cars have their advantages, especially for short-range mobility. But maybe it's too early for India. A lot of research is being done, by the way, worldwide on driverless cars.
It's been so many years. We haven't seen Tesla self-driven car, being made available for public to buy. We haven't seen Google's pilot, and it has run into troubles of its own. So,
Yes,
any talks within Maruti to actually have your own technology of driverless cars? Since we are talking brainstorming about the future.
Yeah, it's at the moment, of course, it is very, very far, this driverless car technology. But there are different levels of autonomous driving. I mean, there are level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Final level is when you don't have any driver, but otherwise even ADAS features, for example, which Hardeep
Is
was
AI
referring
driven?
to, is about assisting the driver to drive the car, and so on and so forth. So there are different levels. Certainly the auto industry has made great progress in India also about the level which is of automation, which helps in driving the vehicle. Of course, we are far away from driverless cars in India, especially if you look at our traffic condition and the rules.
I
There are
was just
certain
going to
rules.
come to that. That, I mean, you could have the best technology, but when you put that best technology on Indian roads, when drivers tend to falter and drivers themselves who can see and hear, run into problems. So, Hardeep,
Yeah, yeah. So if there are some roads where you are going and there are equal number of people coming in the opposite direction, I don't think any software can in the world can help having driverless cars when so many of them. Sometimes I feel, am I on the wrong lane? So many people are coming from the opposite direction, and so that sounds funny, but for driverless cars, you have to have certain rules by which you can write the necessary software for eliminating chances of such accidents and so on and so forth.
right. So, Hardeep, let me take this to you. At this point, of course, India still, it's not on India's priority list, and India is still fairly far when it comes to seeing driverless cars. But we've seen, videos of Bill Gates going viral, sitting, plugged onto the seat belt in the front of a car, and that car is just pretty much driving on its own in among the most crowded streets, in the world. So, technology, yes, will be there. But my question to you is that at the end of the day, I think the legal sort of, framework and precedent will also have to be very clear on who gets penalized when it comes to any mishap that happens on the road by account of AI or AI technology enabled, whether fully autonomous or not, but a decision taken by AI resulting in some mishap. Who should be held accountable? Should it be the service provider who's deployed that AI? Should it be the automobile manufacturer, or should it be the end consumer?
Well, I think that's $1 million question, and I think we need more debate. It's not as simple as we can give a verdict on. I think this needs a far more deliberation than probably what we have today. But overall, the successful deployment of driverless cars heavily depends on the robust infrastructure and supportive regulations, right? And India's diverse road conditions, traffic patterns, and infrastructure gaps, they pose a significant challenge overall. So I think we need to take care of, and this is what Mr. Srivastava also mentioned, I think we are far away from implementing the driverless cars. Of course, we have the technology. For example, I mentioned that in Seltos we launched ADAS level 2. ADAS level 2, and level 5 is the driverless, so to say. That's the ultimate one. So I think in terms of technology, we are geared up for that. But looking at the Indian traffic conditions and regulations, this is posing a big challenge. And coming to your question, I don't think we can give responsibility at this stage to everybody. I think all of them will have to take a certain amount of responsibility, because ultimately they're all involved in that, whether it is the AI company or the manufacturers. So I think we need more debate on that.
Absolutely. So, Nishant Arya, final question to you. Are highways better suited than small roads within cities, and hence, at whatever stage and at whatever time this automation partly or fully comes in, do you think the early adopters of autonomous mobility will actually be commercial vehicles and not passenger vehicles?
Yeah, so actually, that is true, and definitely because they have a definitive route and path, so it becomes easier. And in case of buses, it has been done as well. Just last week, there were many launches. Even we launched our level 3 ADAS system for the global market, where we are clearly seeing that in multiple global markets, what's happening. They are having bus rapid transport, bus BRT routes for buses, and at the same time, there's a big dearth, an issue of concern of availability of drivers. So many cities are seeing that in the international arena, whether in Europe or North America or in many other developed markets, that they'd be going for such kind of buses and such kind of public transport systems with ADAS level 3 and 4. And at the same time, there are a lot of pilots are being done where they have been able to get a lot of success. So definitely, I think one of the first movers in this space would be the public transportation, the commercial vehicle category, which is able to take the leap forward.
All right, well, gentlemen, unfortunately, we've completely run out of time. A lovely discussion and too many more points that we needed to actually brainstorm on, but perhaps on another day. For today, Hardeep Singh Brar, Shashank Srivastav, Nishant Arya, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on Boardroom Brunch. And with that, it's a wrap on this first edition of Boardroom Brunch. The next episode, another industry, another set of industry thinkers will be here to brainstorm with us on what the future will look like and if corporate India is ready for it. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.